Hello and welcome to A Special Gardener's World, celebrating the gardening year in all its seasonal glory. Today we have a series of new films marking the changes as the months progress, from the fresh greens of spring through the riot of summer colour and then the warm hues of autumn. There's always something to look forward to. And far from being a time to put your feet up, winter can be an incredibly productive and of course beautiful time in the garden. Coming up on today's programme, Rachel visits a garden designed to come alive in winter.
They've got these spidery flowers that remind me of little shavings of lemon peel. And just in here, I mean, the perfume is so spicy and rich, it's absolutely delicious.
We meet a man who just can't get enough of cacti.
98, 99, 100. Ouch! Just an obsession.
And Arit hears how the principles of rewilding could benefit our gardens.
I love this great experiment, I really do, and I guess it's now thinking about how to translate that into smaller gardens.
Yeah, it's about opening up opportunities for things to grow.
And I'm in Somerset, exploring an organic garden that's full of innovative planting ideas, colour and a bit of fun. I mean, who wouldn't want a massive wooden egg in their garden? This is the Yo Organic Garden, and it's somewhere I've wanted to come for a long time. In fact, ever since I saw their beautiful Chelsea garden, featuring, of course, the famous egg. But it's a really lovely concept, this garden. They're doing a lot of interesting stuff, working with the soil and experimenting with plants, and that is right up my street. But what is organic? Well, aside from not using lots of chemicals, essentially it's a really circular and sustainable approach to gardening where you nurture the soil, you nurture the plants, and you use everything at your fingertips to create the perfect space. And a really nice feature of this particularly is that they're letting everything go over. Nothing's cut back until the spring, so the wildlife is supported. And I think it looks really beautiful too. We have echinops, echinacea, some lovely seed heads that have gone over and yet still have an amazing amount of beauty to offer us and, of course, the wildlife. With the right planting, a garden can lift our spirits even in the coldest months, as Rachel found out when she went to visit the winter garden at Anglesey Abbey in Cambridgeshire.
After the pastel tints of spring, the vibrant colours of summer and all those lovely autumnal shades, you might be forgiven for thinking that winter can be a bit lacklustre. But you'd be wrong. And I've come back to visit a garden that I've not seen for more than 20 years. I'm so excited to be here again. And this is a place where winter is really celebrated. Evergreens create the backbone of this snaking quarter-of-a-mile path. Block planting is the key feature, repeating patterns along the borders. Senior gardener David Jordan joined Anglesey Abbey in 1998, and he's watched the winter garden evolve over time. David, it's such a treat for me to be back here. I can't tell you. I don't know why I haven't been back sooner, actually. So how's the garden evolved since I was last here? I mean, in terms of the plants that are here.
I think with the trees that have established themselves, they've created different microclimates around, so you get more shade under certain trees. So we've had to adapt the planting to make best use of that. Initially, it was very heavily planted and planted right up close to the path. And it wasn't until we really stepped back after those 21 years and we thought, actually, it's becoming claustrophobic. So we've taken some of the bigger shrubs that are right close to the path and taken them away. So there's actually space for people to move around and makes the garden feel like it's breathing again. So that's the major change.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to leave it another 20 years. Clearly too much has happened in the interim. I'm so glad to come back to this garden. It feels like being a kid in a sweet shop. A place that really celebrates winter planting and all the combinations of things that you can do to create colour and scent and interest. Yeah, wonderful. In this part of the garden, there's this group of Tibetan cherries. It's one of my favourite, fairly small trees, so it works in a lot of gardens. And it has the most beautiful bark. It's smooth, almost like a silk ribbon has been wound all the way up the stems. And here it's grown as a multi-stem specimen, so you get lots of that lovely bark to admire. Absolutely beautiful. And of course, at this time of year, there's no leaf up there in the canopy, so lots of interesting things can happen down below. So you've got these lovely dogwoods, the corners. This is midwinter fire, and they get cut really hard back, so you get the new growth, which has the best colour on it. And around here, just hellebores underneath. And I love this. Come and see on this side the snowdrop, and this is one of my favourite snowdrops. It's called Magnet, and it's got this very slender pedicel, so the flower sort of really dangles and it just moves in the very slightest breeze. Absolutely beautiful. This section of the garden is definitely new. You can see it's all sort of freshly planted here. This is a golden weeping willow, and I really love the way that they've underplanted it with these pittosporums. Now, pittosporum is one of my favourite evergreen shrubs. It's just so useful. It's got the lovely kind of delicacy to it, and it can get pretty tall. I've got one in my garden which is a good couple of metres tall. Alternatively, you can do what they've done here and clip it and keep it really small, almost like box here.
It's all brought together with a splash of winter colour. The soft, lemony Rheinfeld's early sensation daffodils, which can flower as early as December.
I found real treasure here. Look at this, it's a winter carpet of jewel-like flowers as far as the eye can see. You've got the little winter aconites there, glowing gold. And then we've got the hellebores. The flowers stand out really well because last year's leaves have been removed, so the focus is all on that bloom. And then interspersed with this beautiful little magenta pink cyclamen coum. It reminds me of an Elizabethan embroidery with every flower picked out in coloured silk. Gaze at this. I think winter's becoming one of my favourite times of year. It's not only the beauty of the flowers, but the fragrance. I mean, I'm standing here by this group of witch hazels. This one's Hamamelis pallida, this lovely sort of soft, pale yellow colouring. They like an ericaceous soil if possible. And I just think they're the most wonderful, kind of slightly bonkers looking plants. They've got these spidery flowers here that remind me of little shavings of lemon peel. And just in here, I mean, the perfume is sort of spicy and rich, it's delicious. And also things like the viburnum, you've got that sort of sugar pink pom-pom, also really sweet and delicious fragrance. But I've heard there's something even better just around this corner, so we'll go and have a look. Oh yes, just look at this Daphne. It's covered in flowers. The fragrance is, oh, it's really powerful. I mean, never mind tree hugging, you know, this makes you want to shrub hug. It's so beautiful. Wow. I remember this section of the garden very clearly. It had a lot of impact the first time I came, but these silver birches were just saplings. And now, look at them. These long, straight stems, absolutely white. I hear that they actually wash them down in November so that they remain pristine. What a labour of love that must be. And all of this underneath is completely covered with tulips in the spring. It's a tulip called Little Beauty, sort of a dark cerise magenta colour. And I think there are about 4,000 bulbs in here. They did it the first time and a lot of them were taken by squirrels, so they've now replanted and covered it with chicken wire and then mulch on the top. That's a really good tip actually, in the garden and pots as well. But just look at it, it is absolutely majestic and so atmospheric. I really admire the way that they've just stuck to one thing, done it very simply but beautifully. I'm so glad I've come back to this garden because it's really shown me that you have to keep revisiting gardens. If you've liked it in the first place, go again because things change pretty rapidly. And this one, I know it's a winter garden and it really is, but I think it's also just a makes me feel happy garden too.
Of course, gardens are ever evolving and that's what makes them so interesting. But also the weather and the climate is clearly evolving, and perhaps us gardeners have to be a little bit more adaptable about the kinds of plants that we're growing. And here they're doing a bit of an experiment, which is really, really interesting, to see which plants do well when they're not watered. They haven't watered anything here in the arid area of the garden, and it's really fascinating to see what's thrived and what's struggled a little bit more. And there are some surprises. So things like the eupatorium have done really well, and I would expect them to be happier in a moist position, but clearly they're quite adaptable. There's been a great display of phlomis, there's ever reliable verbena, ornamental grasses, there's gaura. There's a huge list of plants that have done really well despite the challenging conditions. So you can have a bit of beauty even if you don't always know what the weather's going to do. Any plant that will cope with very droughty conditions will obviously have adaptations that enable them to cope. You may not even be able to see these. So beneath the soil, some plants have very, very deep roots that can access moisture even when there's no moisture at all at the surface. They may also have very reduced foliage with very long lanceolate leaves, and there's lots of things like Cicericium here that have just that. Or even the ornamental grasses really reduce their foliage so they don't lose moisture through the leaves. One fail-safe way of knowing a plant is drought tolerant is this silvery, particularly if it's hairy foliage. This is Stachys, this is lamb's ear. It's really, really soft. This silver colour reflects light and stops the leaf from overheating. And the fur on the leaf really holds up to any droplets of moisture in the atmosphere and creates a little microclimate around the leaf and prevents moisture loss. So if you see this on any plant, you know it can cope with drought. Now, one group of plants that absolutely thrives in drought is, of course, cacti and succulents. And Eric Saunders from Worcester has quite a collection of them.
Ouch! Ow!
How many succulents and cacti have you got, you think?
Well, roughly, without counting them, I would say cacti and succulents, roughly around about 1,000. Might even be a few more, actually.
Should we go and count them?
Yes. Yeah, we go and count them now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Starting about mid-70s. We were down the town and doing a bit of shopping, went into Woolworths, and I saw 3 cacti, which I bought, took them home. They ended up for about 2 years on the fireplace. So I decided to get an 18-foot greenhouse. The original 3, they went in the greenhouse, and within no time, I completely failed it. I started growing my own plants from seed. And I found that was much more interesting because you can watch them grow and you can get a lot more through doing it that way, and it's much cheaper, so I got much more interested in doing that. This is my collection of cacti, and they're all grown from seed, which is quite an easy process, really. When the fruit is ready on the cactus, you pick it out, put it in a piece of paper, and squeeze it, and the seeds inside the fruit will squeeze out. From this process, you get a small tray and just fill it with gritty compost, put it in another tray full of water, let the water soak completely through it till it's completely wet, then sprinkle your seed on, and then a fine dusting of soil, and put it in a propagator or something with warmth, and basically wait till the seed comes through. It's quite a simple process. And from that, you get it'll be like this, a tray of cacti, mammillarias. They were sown about 2 years ago. I was a milk roundsman years ago, delivering the milk to every doorstep, basically. And I used to have a cup of tea with a couple of old ladies, Amy and Dora, and they knew I was interested in cacti. And when we were having our tea, they said, you know what, I bought that cactus about 3 months ago, and it's still flaring. It hasn't stopped flaring. And I said, well, you know why, Amy? And she said, no. I said, because they're artificial. And then the next process, put them into a smaller pot, like so, and let them grow on a bit. Probably a couple of years I'll leave them in there for. And then from that, I shall repot into this size pot, just to grow them on a bit. And I actually think they're more attractive when they're small. So I just leave them in this size pot. If you want bigger plants, you can do it. Just keep repotting each year. But I think they're much more attractive like this. '91, '92, '93, '94, '95, '96, '97, '98, '99, 100. Ouch! Just an obsession. I just couldn't stop, actually. That's the trouble, really. I'm a bit like that. Mammillaria boccasana from Mexico. It's one of my favourites. It's the flowers. You get beautiful flowers from it. They can be pinky colour, like this one, or a creamy colour. And I think it's a very attractive plant, and it's easy to grow as well. So that's why it's one of my favourites. 239, 240, 241, 242. It's a mammillaria from Mexico. It's quite a lovely cactus because it'll clump. Over the years, it'll keep clumping, keep throwing like fingers out. He's probably about 12 years old. But it started off with just a finger like that. And then it gradually spreads more and more. And it's a lovely yellow colour as well. Yeah, lovely cactus. 420, 421, 422, 423. I grow that many from seed in cuttings that in the end, I need the room. So basically then, I'll move them on, and that gives me more room then to grow more and more. This is part of my succulent collection, which I seem to have gone mad on for the last 4 years. They're so easy to do from cuttings, and this is how I do all these. This is one of my favourites, Echevera prolifera. They throw a long stem out, and there's the little plant on the end. So all you've got to do is just cut a bit of that off, put it in dry soil until it roots. And then you've got to plant this size, and that plant will go on to this size in just a couple of years. That's it. That's how easy it is. And I'll just move them on after a while so as I got room for a lot more plants. 625, 626, 627, 628, 629. Oh, this is where my propagating greenhouse, really. I spend a lot of time in here. I'm always getting moaned at by the wife, being stuck in here. But I just get lost in time. All you do is take a leaf off, lay them in some dry soil, and just leave it. And once you see some little plantlets come from the leaf, they're feeding off the leaf till they form their own roots. And once they form their own roots, then the leaf itself will die because it's done its job. It's fed the little plantlet. Basically, from that, it'll grow into a little plant like this. I shall cut that one off, say around about there, take the leaves off, let it dry out a bit, just for a day or two, and put that straight in some dry soil, and then leave it. Don't water it, and then after a couple of weeks or a bit longer, depends which variety, it'll throw out roots. Seven 754, 754, 5, 756, 758, 7.
Eric, have you thought about getting another greenhouse?
No, not really. I think I'll just stick to this one now. I'll say be another couple of thousand succulents. 801, 802, 803, 804. This is a mammillaria. It's one of the oldest I've got now. It's sown in 1997, so it's 25 years old now. It's very prolific. You get a lot of seed pods come off this, so I should think I've grown about 100, could be 100, because it sets seed quite well, this one, and they're so easy to grow. It's like people, I suppose. You know, some people you find attractive and others you don't. The wife can't stand them, but yeah, it's just lovely, you know. Like freaks of nature, aren't they? Yeah, yeah. Oh, I've got a thorn in me now. Oh, I shouldn't have touched that. That is the downside of it, though. You know, don't touch them. Grow them, but don't touch them. 996, 997, 998, 996. Oh, I'll have to start all over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Cacti and succulents are a fascinating group of plants, but it's Eric's passion and enthusiasm for propagation that's so contagious, and it really could apply to any plants that you're interested in. But what is the difference between a cactus and a succulent? Well, all cacti are succulents, but not all succulents are cacti. And you can usually tell the difference because a cactus is very spiny, and these spines have a cushioning at the base that's called an areole. The spines themselves are actually modified leaves, and it's the stems which do the photosynthesis on a cactus. Now, all plants have something called stomata. They're little openings where gas exchange can happen, and the vast majority of those stomata are open in the daytime. But with succulents and cacti, they're open at night time, so all the oxygen can come out, carbon dioxide can come in, and the simple reason for that is it stops them from losing all of their moisture in the hot, dry sun of the day. And that is a pretty good adaptation if you live in a desert. It's time to visit one of your gardens now, and we're off to the USA, not to the desert for more cacti, but to Atlanta, Georgia, and a rather unique greenhouse.
Hello, I'm Megan, and this is Patsy and Ruby, and we'd like to show you around our garden. This is what the yard looked like 3 years ago when I first moved in. I've since added some raised beds because Georgia's known for its red clay, which most plants aren't happy to grow in. My partner and I both love coming up with projects to build out here, and this greenhouse is the first one we did together. We actually went all over the city to get recycled windows for the walls, and inside I wanted to have as much room as possible for hanging plants, so I put drainage holes in an old chicken feeder, and I actually mounted it using a hanging bicycle mount that had a little pulley system on it, so I can raise and lower this whole thing down to plant in and then hoist it back up when I'm done. And just outside of the greenhouse is the first of 2 ponds we've put in, and some of my favorite flowers are in bloom out here right now. We have the delphiniums. They have the most remarkable color. And over in the pond, actually, are some of the irises, which just opened up this morning. We even have a little bearded iris hanging over the side here. This is the second pond we put in, which is quite a bit bigger than the other one, and it's pretty neat because you can actually walk across it on the rocks. And I'm very excited for this one because it's more full sun, and we've actually just gotten our first 2 lily pads to come up. Over in this bed, the foxglove started to bloom, and just past that, you can see the chicken coop. Last year, I became obsessed with getting silky chickens, so we built them this coop out in the vegetable garden, which we fenced in for them too, and their coop has a couple of windows that were left over from the greenhouse project, and they also have a tiny turret on the end which has their nesting boxes in it. That's where you like to hang out, Ruby. All right, thanks for coming to look around the garden with us.
It's so clever what Megan did with her chicken feeders and with the greenhouse as well, actually, and goes to show you don't need to spend a fortune in order to be productive in the garden, which also is demonstrated here. Look at these beautiful twigs that are being used to support the plants. There's squashes here, beans here, and something I've not seen before, these are rods that are usually used to reinforce concrete, but being repurposed here to grow beans up, and they look really, really good. I might try that. Now, if you are growing plants organically, especially vegetables, then looking after the soil is really important. These brassicas look incredible. And keeping them looking good, it's all about that soil. Now here, I have a barrow full of grass clippings, which might look odd, but in fact, it works really beautifully as a mulch. If you just sprinkle that around the base of these plants, it will keep moisture in, it will keep the weeds down, and eventually, when that rots, it will feed the soil. And I do exactly the same on my allotment, only using the weeds I've pulled up. Still to come on today's programme. Nick studies the science of growing hardy orchids from seed.
It's only just visible.
Gosh, they really are tiny.
And Arit visits a walled garden that's undergone a radical transformation.
This productive garden looks, smells, tastes and feels good. And it's impossible really to imagine that it wasn't like that before. This was all lawn.
But first, throwing caution to the wind is something many of us gardeners are used to, especially if we're growing something for the first time. And that's exactly what friends Marianne and Camilla did when they set up a cut flower farm in North London.
We're florists and we're flower growers. We started knowing relatively little about flower farming. Marianne had had an allotment, I had had a garden for a few years, and we'd both been growing flowers. But growing in this way is a totally different ballgame. So yeah, along the way we've made tons of mistakes, we've had tons of failure, but we've also learned from those mistakes, and I think we are in some ways better growers for making all those mistakes.
You also need to recognise the successes when they do come, because it can be really easy just to focus on the things that go wrong.
We started growing in April 2017. That's when we got access to the site.
It was just a complete serendipitous twist of fate. We both worked full-time in a totally different world. I worked as a producer in theatre and Camilla worked in fashion. And it was really because you decided to quit your job, hey?
Yeah, it gave us the impetus to just try it.
We walked into this glass house and were starting with absolutely nothing.
I think we felt quite daunted.
But it was also so exciting to suddenly have this enormous kind of growing playground, I guess. You know, how lucky are we to be in central London and growing in this really protected, amazing environment. We're cutting anti-rhinum or snapdragons here, which are a brilliant cut flower because the more you cut, the more they reward you. And this is Chantilly light salmon, really useful for wedding work because of these beautiful pinky peach tones that work really well in wedding bouquets. In the heat of the summer, you might be here cutting, at 6 a.m. or even earlier. As soon as it gets really warm in here, then the flowers aren't going to like being cut and they're going to take longer to recover. The secret to success with cutting flowers is to do it before the heat of the day is kind of hitting the back of your neck, really.
We grow small quantities of a lot of things. What we've found is that if we grow varieties and plants that we really love, then we invest in them and we look after them a lot better. We grow a mixture of annuals and perennials. I'd say some of the more unusual varieties that we grow, or varieties that you wouldn't really find at the market, are varieties that don't travel well, or they're varieties that it's just not viable for the market to sell them. So we don't really follow the sort of normal guidelines of floristry of your focal flowers and your stars, but we do want a variety of shapes, and texture is something that we both really love. For us, is key and it's everything because it really anchors you in a moment. We have flowers at some of the most important milestones in our lives, at births, deaths, marriages, and if the flowers that accompany you in those moments are scented, then you'll keep that memory in mind forever. This is Hesperus that I've just sown, which is a biennial, so we sow it at this time of year and it flowers in another year's time, and it is actually very heavily scented, Hesperus or sweet rocket, and it's an absolute garden stalwart for us. We couldn't really do without it. This is the jar where we started saving Cerinthe. Cerinthe is actually a really expensive seed, but it's an incredibly easy seed to save.
This is rocket, which most people will think of as just your bog standard salad crop, but actually at the beginning of the year, when flowers are really few and far between, this is one of our absolute favourites to use in bouquets. It's got these really fine, elaborate veins on the petals, and the petals are kind of a beautiful, creamy, yellowy colour.
When these flowers start blooming, we're so starved of colour and so starved of flowers, so we're just so happy to see them. But now they're done, we don't need them anymore. We've got like a whole candy shop to play with. We have a planting plan, which I would say is really a life's work.
So we have to make use of the space like a kind of really stressful jigsaw puzzle. You're trying to do this job quickly as well because it gets really, really hot in here. It's not one of our favourite jobs, is it?
No, definitely not.
Anything's fair game in the cutting garden. We're just like magpies looking around and finding whatever we think is beautiful. I think in traditional floristry there can be a real hierarchy with roses or peonies being everything, but actually sometimes we find in our work we get most excited about something like this coriander, which has this beautiful movement which is going to seed, so you have the beautiful green seeds as well as these lovely white umbellifer flowers, and that can be just as exciting and inspiring within a floral design as something which is a big showy bloom.
This is a take on the classic request from brides to have a green and white palette. Sort of turned it on its head a bit. This bouquet shows us that you can really dismantle this idea that there's a hierarchy of flowers. There's no focal flowers in here, no hydrangeas, no roses, no peonies, when roses and peonies are very much in season. And corncockle, which is this white flower, binds it all together and your eye is drawn to it. But then behind that you've got all of these amazing textures like the sorrel, and then we've got canary grass and quaking grass, and then the hesperus for scent. And you get this incredible show of the season.
Anyone starting out with flower growing needs to keep it simple. Don't be too tempted by all those seed catalogues with those amazing exotic varieties, or try and grow a hellebore from seeds. You're probably going to be disappointed, and there's nothing worse than bad morale once you're in the garden.
Grow things that are morale boosters, grow things that will germinate easily, and just grow a few things and get really good at doing that and then expand. Growing, for me, really is my passion.
Absolutely no way I think either of us would go back to working at a desk and looking at a spreadsheet. This is just a unique and incredibly privileged place to work.
I find Camilla and Marianne's attitude really, really refreshing, especially using edibles as flowers, because they can be just as beautiful. Although I have to say, possibly, coriander seeds aren't quite as impressive as some of these dahlias. Look at this one. This is literally as big as my head. It's enormous. But look at the range of colours here. I mean, you have beautiful oranges, peach with yellow, there's reds, there's purples, spiky ones, cactus ones, decorative ones, single flowers. There are so many kinds of dahlias to grow. But if you are growing flowers for cutting, don't just think about big, showy, blousy blooms. Sometimes it really pays to think about texture as well, and that can come in the form of seed heads. So things like lovely panicum. This is an annual panicum with a really frothy seed head, but also pennisetums are really beautiful. And then things like amaranth, velvet curtains, and look at the length of these flowers, they're incredible. But they're also really, really good for birdseed, and actually close relatives of this, like quinoa, and have edible seeds for us as well. Not that you necessarily want to eat these ones. But if you want to encourage wildlife, then having seeds in the garden is really important, as well as thinking about scents and different kinds of flowers, especially, as they have done here, night-scented flowers. So there's Nicotiana here, and things like stocks and phlox are really good for night pollinators like moths. So if you think about all of these different things, you can have a cut flower garden that's also maybe edible, but also really valuable for wildlife. Now, earlier this year, Nick met a man who has mastered the science of growing hardy orchids from seed. In fact, he doesn't do it in the potting shed, he does it in the potting laboratory.
Native orchids are the enigmatic film stars of the plant world. They tend to bloom from about April to September, with the vast majority appearing in around May and June time. Now, there are over 50 species growing in the UK. Some are common and you'll spot them all over the place, and some are very rare and protected by the law, so don't be tempted to pick them. Now, if you want to find orchids in the world, the best place to look is wild meadows or undisturbed pieces of ground.
Tony Hayes is passionate about native orchids. He's been growing them from seed for the last 15 years.
I grew up near the South Downs in Sussex, and as a family we used to go out on nature walks quite a lot, and that's really where I first became aware of our wild orchids and how wonderful they were. I was a clinical scientist in the National Health Service, and because I'd been in a laboratory-based career, and then I found out that you could grow orchids from seed in a laboratory setting, that sort of immediately appealed to me.
There are over 30,000 species of orchids on Earth, and they all share one common trait. Instead of having the typical stigma and stamen that you get in the centre of most flowers, with orchids, all of those parts, those male and female parts, are fused together in the centre into a little piece that's known as the column.
Unlike many tropical species which can be found growing on trees, native orchids here in the UK grow in the ground. They're adapted to our temperate climate and have smaller flowers.
Which are the most common ones, the ones that people are most likely to be able to spot?
Yes, well, I suppose the common spotted orchid is the very obvious one to mention. You get it on a lot of different soil types and habitats. The heath-spotted orchid here, it's got very marked sort of dark spots on the leaves. Then there's southern marsh orchid, perhaps, which you would find in rather boggy areas. There's one called the green-winged orchid. Used to be really quite common, but unfortunately it has been declining quite a bit.
Native orchids not only have beauty, they're also cleverly evolved. Take, for example, the bee orchid. It mimics a female bee in terms of flowers and scent. This then attracts the male bee, which flies off, carrying the pollen. Even more clever, bee orchids can self-pollinate in the absence of an insect pollinator. But they may take as long as 6 years to flower, and may flower only once in their lifetime. Another rarity is the lady's slipper. The flower petals are maroon colour, and the sac of the orchid is bright yellow, with some red spots. It can grow up to 60 centimetres tall.
Most of my seeds from people who've contacted me and they have orchids on their land. You have to get it from ethical and legal sources. You can see that it's only just visible.
Gosh, they really are tiny. Now, you use a particular fungus to aid in the germination, which is just fascinating.
Yes, if they don't have a fungus come along and help them out, then they'll die pretty quickly because they run out of food. The orchid seed controls the fungus in order to get nutrients and water and minerals, and that allows it to grow until it gets to the point where it has green leaves, and then it can obviously photosynthesize itself. All I have to do now is just sow the seeds into the petri dish with the fungus. They become what's called protocorms, and at this stage they can go into the fridge for about 6 weeks just to give them a winter. They can then be transferred again into a jam jar. They start growing quite nicely into these green seedlings.
So these little guys are pretty demanding to grow, but not impossible.
Well, you certainly have to have a lot of patience to do it, and probably to be a bit crazy. But after about 3 years, if you're lucky, you might get a nice flowering plant out of it, and that will make it all worthwhile, certainly to me.
But if germinating seeds in fungus is a step too far for you, it's possible to sow orchid seeds straight into a wild patch of your garden and see what happens.
And so how easy would it be for a gardener to, starting from scratch, to create a piece of wild meadow in their garden?
Well, I don't think it's very difficult at all. You should have it in a fairly sunny spot. It should be somewhere where the soil is not very fertile, because wildflowers and orchids in particular don't like fertility in the soil. You really won't see anything for 3 or 4 years after you've scattered seed. But then if you're lucky, it can just take off.
These fleeting treasures of our countryside are definitely worth searching out. I love their ephemeral beauty. And Tony has proved, with a little patience, it's possible to grow them at home and create a wild haven of your own.
I have to say, to have the dedication and also the skill to be able to grow seeds like that is really remarkable. Not all of us have that, but what we all do have, or often, is some seeds in our gardens. And although it's lovely to leave some for the birds all through the winter, it's also great to pick some, dry them, and save them and sow them again next spring. Now, these are cosmos, and they're really easy to harvest the seeds from. The key thing is recognising when they're ready. So something like this, which is a dead head that's gone over, but the seeds aren't yet ready. You can see there's even still a little bit of the stamen there. Instead, you would take a seed when it looks a bit like this, a little starburst spike, and that is easy to harvest. Just take them off. There we go. So all you need to do really is put them in a paper bag, label it, and then store that somewhere cool and dry for the winter. And then that's ready to plant out again in the spring. But all of these annuals, you could take seed from things like calendula, cornflowers, nicotiana, and morning glories. If you save all of these seeds, you can keep them and sow them next spring and really maximise the biodiversity of your garden. Now we're off to another one of your gardens, and this one is absolutely crammed full of wildlife-friendly plants.
Hi Gardeners World, my name's Sarah and I wanted to show you my garden which I've grown specially to support wildlife. Now we're really lucky in our garden because it's a south-facing garden, so flowers and all plants seem to grow really quickly. But I try to grow a really good variety for pollinators as best I can. Borage is by far the favourite of nearly everybody. The geraniums are really popular, there's daisies and knapweed and calendula, all really great for pollinators.
Here's a small tortoiseshell butterfly which is really enjoying these fox and cubs. This year in particular, we've really enjoyed watching the red mason bees come and go and filling up the bee hotels and making their nests.
In early May, we were lucky enough to spot these two bees mating and get a little film of them doing so. Not long afterwards, we noticed the bees going in and laying eggs. This is really pleasing for me because this bee box I made myself last year, so I was really chuffed to see them using it. Once they finished laying their eggs, they used mud to fill up the chamber. We were looking around the garden and we were wondering where they were getting the mud from.
So we have this little wall in our garden which is kind of crumbling at the base, and down here is where the bees were going and getting the mud from. The red mason bee activity is quieting down now, but the garden is still buzzing with lots of other bees and other pollinators. So I hope that I've managed to show you by just adding a few flowers and plants or leaving things in messy places, you can really encourage great wildlife into your garden.
Well, I'm definitely all for letting things be a little bit messy and certainly letting plants choose what they want to do. This verbena, for example, that will seed itself everywhere. You don't even need to collect seeds from it. And at the Knepp Estate in West Sussex, they're experimenting with just that kind of thing. And Arit went to find out more.
The 3,500 acre Knepp Estate has been pioneering the principles of rewilding for the past 20 years. It's been a huge project that has totally transformed the landscape. It's been such a success, the wildlife has come flocking. What is rewilding? Well, put simply, it's restoring the natural processes into the landscape that us humans have removed. And how we do that is by creating diverse, rich habitats that restore and regenerate ecosystems. But what does that mean for us gardeners? I'm about to find out. Knepp are also in the final phase of a horticultural experiment. They're applying their principles of rewilding on a much smaller scale to their walled garden. And Charlie Harper is the head gardener. Charlie, what was the drive about doing an experiment here in the walled garden?
We have seen in the wider landscape that rewilding can bring in all sorts of biodiversity. And here was a croquet lawn beforehand. So why not learn from rewilding and apply the same principles into this garden to really boost the potential for biodiversity?
How does rewilding actually work in that wilder landscape?
Well, over there, it's not just letting everything go. It relies on animal disturbance. So one example is the Tamworth pig, which is basically like a wild boar. And that goes in there and it rootles the ground. It digs a hole with its snout, and then you go from a flat, grassy landscape to one that has got this trough in the middle. So suddenly you've got dry bits at the top and you've got wet bits at the bottom, and you've got shady bits, and then you've got sunny bits. And all of these are different places that plants can grow.
So what you're saying, Charlie, is that I would need a pig in my garden.
I know, it's not particularly practical to chuck a pig in your garden, granted. We haven't done that here, because what we're saying is in this garden context, we are those animals, and we will disturb the landscape. A garden can be a moving ecosystem, so you've got things that seed themselves around, and you've got some plants that might fail and some that do really well. Importantly, it never stays the same.
I really love that idea, that I can relax a little and think like a pig.
You got it.
Right in the centre of the garden, they have created an ephemeral pond, a constructed dip in the landscape, which is dry in summer and wet in winter. Charlie, tell me what is going on in this landscape.
So as you can see here, we've got topography.
Yeah.
So we've got dry bits at the top, and then we've got wet bits at the bottom, and then we've got sunny bits and we've got shady bits, and we've also mixed up the materials that we've used to plant into. So you've got that mosaic of habitats forming. There are some mounds which are made up really of crushed farm building that came down on the estate. And rather than paying for someone to take it away, we've used it to create that really harsh environment which completely affects the way that plants grow in them. And as you can see, these plants are not remotely concerned about being planted into quite a lot of crushed concrete, really.
What type of plants are in this dip here?
Well, actually, there's quite a few sort of more surprising things. So we've got things like Veronicastrums in here. We've got Sanguisorba, Eupatorium, and a very interesting Filipendula called Filipendula yezuensis as well, which look like they're just hanging on now, but in winter they will come into their own.
Great, which I guess in turn, that's another habitat, isn't it?
Exactly.
With biodiversity in the UK dwindling at a rapid rate, it's more important than ever to reverse that trend. And with some simple ideas, that's where we gardeners can come in. I really love the approach in this garden, that everywhere is an opportunity to create habitat. Like here, for example, some of the old materials, the old bricks have been piled up, put together, and that's an opportunity to not only plant into it, but allow plants to self-seed, create different areas for insects, invertebrates to house themselves in the shadier areas, in the sunnier areas. And that's what's really important. As gardeners, we can go into our own spaces, see what materials we've got left, and just get creative. Charlie, can we just stop and look at this mosaic of planting?
Yeah. So we've got plants like this Perovskia, which is just covered in bees and flies at the moment. And that Achillea at the end, which is one called Coronation Gold. I think also it's worth looking at the plants that we didn't put in there, which have just arrived. For example, you see the Scarlet Pimpernel down here?
Yeah.
It's self-seeded into the path. What it does do is provide these little tiny protein-rich seeds for birds and small mammals. So it's about looking at the function of everything and seeing, is it good for biodiversity?
They are also looking at how rewilding can be applied to their kitchen garden. This productive garden looks, smells, tastes and feels good. And it's impossible really to imagine that it wasn't like that before. This was all lawn. They've increased the gravelled areas and made sure that every single pocket is interplanted. They're known as dirty paths because here the gardeners want to make sure that habitats are available at every single turn so that all biodiversity is welcome into this space. They've left some vegetables to go to seed to provide food for birds and insects, and the yew has been jaggedly pruned to allow birds to easily nest in there. I love this great experiment here at Knepp, I really do, and I guess it's now thinking about how to translate that into smaller gardens.
Yeah, exactly. When thinking about whatever space that you've got, you know, whether that be just a roof like I had before I came here, where I was thinking about the range of different structures that you can use by just arranging pots, thinking about the function of each different plant within that mix. Think about your topography. Make that lawn, rather than just having a flat expanse, which we know we don't see in nature very often, make it more complex. Allow anthills, molehills to form. You know, it's about opening up opportunities for things to grow. It's really just a change of mindset.
I've just got to keep thinking like a little animal, going through my garden, grazing and digging around and rooting.
It's a great way to garden. It's really quite freeing if you think about that.
I really love the idea of dirty paths, and that garden at Knepp looked absolutely breathtaking. The lovely thing about seeds is they come in so many different shapes and sizes. I mean, there's so much to admire. It's a really valuable part of a plant's life cycle, obviously for the survival of that species, but also because it just looks so beautiful and it's so often overlooked. I mean, look at these honesty seeds. They're so delicate and papery. And look at this allium. This is a lovely Allium schubertii. And look, these seeds here are ripe and ready to take. But just as a dried seed head, that looks really, really gorgeous. And of course, lots of seeds, as well as being edible for the birds, are edible for us. So sunflower seeds, nigella seeds, like this one, coriander seeds, fennel seeds, caraway seeds. There's so many that we can grow for us as well, leaving some out for the birds, of course. That's all for today. Next week, Adam will be taking stock of the first year in his new garden.
I think a lot of us disengage with our gardens through the winter months because we don't feel there's enough colour out there. Well, I think there is.
Carol visits a garden that screams summer.
At this moment, it's the rose that steals the show in all its myriad forms. It's wonderful.
And there's a taste of the exotic at Toby's place.
I'd love to tell you I've done something special to get these olives. I've fed them with a magical elixir, but I haven't. These plants just thrive on neglect, quite frankly, and being ignored.
Bye for now.